You have to know that there are differences and that those differences can be and should be accepted if it doesn't affect the work.
Welcome to Worth Quoting, a program sponsored by the Open Campus at Florida Community College at Jacksonville. I'm Carol Spalding Minor, your host, and with me today is Patricia Russell-McCloud, a professional speaker on the issue of diversity for us at least today, and an attorney by training, and an FCC lawyer in the past, and now just going around making motivational speeches on all kinds of subjects, but we want to focus on diversity today. Tell me what your message is when you talk to people about diversity.
Well, interestingly and increasingly, America has to come to grips with the fabric and fiber of its heterogeneity, its differences in gender, in race, in color, in creed, in lifestyle. And that reality says we have a need to explore the differences so that we can better understand each other, hopefully so that we can work together for the common good.
And what kind of reception are you getting for this message? How do you help people do exactly what you said?
The anticipation is that we're raising the consciousness for individuals to look at themselves and look at others, to appreciate their way of doing things, and to know that different does not mean deficient, defective, subordinate, insufficient, disadvantaged, and that different has merit, and every way is not the way of the majority.
Do you handle differences of gender differently than you would handle differences of race or other kinds of differences?
I think that the conscious raising is the same, but the nuances of those differences may have different examples, different up close and personal glances, the way you might introduce what a man would do versus what a woman would do in seeking to go from here to there in a car trip. When lost, the man may very reluctantly ask for directions after you are 50 miles out of the way, whereas a woman may urge him to do it much earlier. So that humorous way of looking at oneself, those life experiences make it more palatable to receive.
I think there's a lot of research now about this gender thing, which I guess you're really on top of, because that's a good example of, I guess, the classic one. How does that help in the workplace? How does knowing that help?
Well, if you have an expectation of difference and an acceptance of difference, then you are not you are not lockstep mandated to ensure that everyone is robotized to your way of doing things. Now, that does not suggest that there's not order and a need for an understanding of what's going to happen in a work unit. But there is an acceptance that your management style might be hierarchical, mine might be empowering. Your management style might be closed door, mine might be open door. Your management style might be to have input on an issue, mine might be to give a directive. So to appreciate that difference lowers the stress for the supervisor and then allows the maximization of potential. Because if a person is harnessed and you prefer a blouse that is blue and I prefer a blouse that is pink, if I feel that I am restricted by wearing the pink blouse or the blue blouse, and I'm somehow inhibited from feeling free enough to do my best, then the organization doesn't benefit.
So these things get in the way.
They get in the way.
How do you get them out of the way?
You raise the level of understanding of difference, and as long as it is not bottom line affecting the organization, then you have to make a decision. Which battles are you going to pick? You know, what am I going to go after? What's my bottom line? And if your bottom line is maximum productivity, maximizing potential, well-being, mentally, physically, well-being in the workplace, then you make that decision consciously, and you will see the difference, or you will become able to celebrate it.
So do you have a different message for the supervisor than you would for the employee, the person who's in power, than the diverse group that's trying to get into the mainstream of what's going on?
You have a message that raises issues that may impact both groups, because you don't always have the senior managers in a room. But if you do, and you know that, then you can, of course, tailor it so that it's supervisors receiving it only. But usually the audiences are more diverse.
So what message would you give them? What message is out there?
Celebrate differences. Don't be intolerant. Be accepting. Get to know, get to understand. Travel beyond yourself. Break paradigms. Go outside of your comfort zones. Know that the reason why we haven't done all of these things is not because we're not intelligent. It's because habits are comfortable. And it's always easier when you've always done it that way. So why wouldn't we keep in the same framework? Why wouldn't we closet ourselves in sameness and status quo? Because we're comfortable. Now, to explore and experience outside of that means difference, and difference disquiets. Change unsettles. So I'm asking for exploration, discovery, and new information coming into one's persona.
Well, these days, change is so incredible that maybe people are looking for some comfort zone somewhere. Are you finding there's more resistance to diversity now with all this other kind of change out there? Or is it easier to have more acceptance of diversity with all this rapid change? I mean, almost chaos. You look at Tom Peters' writings and things like that, and you talk about these organizations and keeping up with the rapid change. Is it easier or harder?
I think there's a standing on tiptoe, peeping over into difference, willingness. And there's an ambiguity about how much comfort can we feel individually for all of this rapid change. But there is also a knowledge base that says change is constant. And if I am to have my finger on the pulse for my organization, I at least have to know, standing on tiptoe, that it exists.
So what is the next step after the tiptoe over the fence? What do you do next?
I think once you know that change is constant, once you know that people do not want to have a culture or a creed or a color or a gender or a lifestyle that is unappreciated, then you have to be focused about inclusion. You can't any longer say, well, what are they talking about at the water fountain? And why aren't they speaking English? And why is his handshake so limp-wristed? And why is she shaking hands like a man? What's wrong with them anyway? You have to know that there are differences and that those differences can be and should be accepted if it doesn't affect the work.
And what point does it affect the work? I I think some people may be afraid that if they accept parts of this, the appearance or the demeanor or some of these other things, that it would affect the culture of the organization. They don't want to see the culture of the organization change.
It affects the work if a person isn't able to do his or her best work. If she or he is not mentally able to feel comforted by the work environment. 3, it affects the work if that person doesn't use all of his or her creative ability in producing their work product. And if the individual somehow feels that the preference and prejudice is one of just to tolerate it because they won't make it, they'll be out of here, that attitude is picked up by an individual who is quote unquote different, and that person feels mentally rejected, if not actually.
How accepting of the corporate culture can diverse cultures be without kind of betraying their own culture? I mean, do women have to be like men to be successful or to get along, which has been the old, I guess, the old way of doing it? Do other cultures have to be like the white culture to be successful? Is that a part of, I mean, that's a part of what we've done. When people have come here before, immigrants have come here before, they've abandoned their language, they've really tried to fit in. Now it looks like we're trying to help everybody feel like they can fit in.
Well, we've tried to clone people, and that's what you're speaking about. We've tried to make them fit, and we haven't forced it if they don't. We've asked them to exit. I'm saying that we are seeking now a balance that is palatable to both, and it's not easy. This little assignment here is not easy. It's a very difficult, laborious process, not a program. See, people looking for a quick fix on diversity. It is a process. It evolves. It comes over weeks and months and even years of trying to get to know and get to understand and get to like and get to accept. And I'm saying that the inclusion will come without the abandonment of one's culture. I think it comes with getting to know what Yom Kippur is. Why is African American history important? And why are you as a Hispanic that you don't want to be called Spanish speaking or Latino? It's that understanding that helps a person say, I feel comfortable that my supervisor and my colleagues are accepting because they too understand.
So where does this go with politically correct? You know, what's your feeling about that whole trend?
There is comfort in labels, and we find nomenclature or labels very classically contemporary, and to say that women are now no longer going to be called girls, they're going to be called women straight across the board. But if we say that, then is there to be comfort in the fact that women are also earning 75 cents of the dollar of their male counterpart? The nomenclature is not enough. Is it comfortable to say that minorities will be called people of color when you also know that 2/3 of the whole world is comprised of people of color? So why is that nomenclature enough? Is it acceptable to say that physically challenged persons are not, in fact, handicapped, and we then omit and make secondary the necessity to have more access to mainstream participation by putting a ramp or having a signer in an auditorium so that a person who may be hearing impaired can benefit by the inclusion? The language use is not enough. It's first step.
And second step is what?
Second step is to, one, probe next step. Find it. Ask the questions. Ask those affected groups, those targeted groups that get behind the nomenclature. What would make it better for you in this environment? And whether, three, that need matches the corporate culture. Because we're not going to have a y'all come and everything goes and anything goes, because there is an expectation of some uniformity and some business organizational structure. And those matches may be initially mismatched, but the probing and then the need to lockstep and come up with the fabric that makes us holistic.
How have you been answering the question about the issue at one of the colleges where the president said something about the research on race and the differences in intelligence and that kind of thing, and the student body wanted to get him fired for those kinds of things? That's in some ways a nomenclature. It's a non-politically correct thing to do. And so it goes beyond, I mean, the words were made action, or got a reaction anyway. What is your response to that?
When you talk about, you're talking about President Lawrence at Rutgers, who's talked about genetic background, genetic heredity background being such that African Americans were not expected to perform well on standardized examinations. Well, I think it was a hidden affirmation of his true feeling. I really believe that he believes that. And to say that, oh, I really didn't mean it that way, and oh, I'm sorry that I said that, it was just a statement of what he really believes. And the bell curve is not different. There needs to be a face-to-face encounter with what we think, what baggage we bring to the table for the probing. And if we're constantly not going to be cathartic in our expression of what we really believe, we can't ever solve it. We can't ever get to it. And most people, let's take another example. I don't see color. They'll look at me and say, I don't see color. And I say, you have impaired vision? I see color. I'm clear. Every day when I look in the mirror, I see color. Why don't you? And if we can see color and then go from there, I think we can benefit from it.
Okay, but let's go back to this Rutgers example.
Right.
Should the student body demand his job for what he said?
Well, I think that there does need to be some exploration of his true thoughts, because he is obviously not the president of all persons if he is carrying the baggage of thinking that half of those whom he represents and administers are in fact inferior, and that they have a genetic inability to perform. So if you're going to be an administrator on today's campus, you may not need to be, in fact, the president if you can't be inclusive or honest. I mean, we have Dr. Foster up for grabs for his statement that he had one abortion and then he jumped to 39, and now suddenly he's not worthy because he's been dishonest. Is President Lawrence more truthful?
Yeah, and at what point do you lose everything for these kinds of statements?
For your statements.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, any one of us could, in reflection, have a misstatement. Is your whole career ruined because of that misstatement? Now, I don't know Dr. Lawrence, but I do know that based upon what I've read, he evidently has been quite inclusive and quite effective as an administrator. And the question is whether he should exit based upon this statement. I don't know.
I don't either, but it comes up a lot when you see the Andy Rooneys and the other kinds of people who either say something that they shouldn't have said by somebody's standards. There's a lot of that, and I think people are really edgy about this subject now, and the politically correct stuff, you know, and the change of the to the 90s, I think, has made it such that people are much more tentative. So I think they need some help from you as a motivational speaker on diversity about how to handle it.
Well, I think there has to be an understanding that people are human. That's the first of it. Secondly, I think that people have hidden agendas. I really do. I think that people will say what is appropriate to get through a situation, whether it's a job where you're the supervisor, whether you're the person who's working in a corporate culture. You want to keep your boat afloat. You do not want to rock the boat. And so people go through in this make-believe existence, almost being a play actor throughout their work experience. Some people talk about the duality of their existence because they go to work in lockstep and they're roboticized by the environment, and then it's kind of it's over at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever time you exit. I mean, that's unacceptable, but it also is real.
You're going to talk about the future, and I guess up to the year 2000. What can we expect in this arena, and what kinds of advice do you give?
Well, what you can expect is that the new persons who are going to access the workplace are going to be very unlike those who are there now. That Hudson Institute has told us that of the 25 million persons who are going to be new between 87 and 2000 are going to be non-white male. They're going to be females, minorities, men and women, and immigrants. And so, therefore, we're going to have to know these people better. We're going to have to look for their talents, and we're going to have to seek to understand them so that we can have bottom line thriving economically in the work culture. If we don't, it's not that I would prefer white male. They're not going to be there. So we're going to have to use what we have, and what we have will be different.
Okay, so is this diversity that diverse from the white male versus everybody else, or are you looking at how to understand diversity within the diversity?
Both.
Both.
Both. Because white males still dominate everything except perhaps the NOW, National Organization of Women in America. And that does not send a real crystal clear message to minorities and women and immigrants as it relates to their expected access to mainstream participation, A. B, I would say that there has to be, in the midst of that new access of those persons in those special interest, atypical groups, an understanding that one size does not fit all, and your diversity in diverse groupings does exist. Because just because I am African American female, that does not mean that the next 25 will be like me.
Okay. Has your message changed since the election of 1994, where there's this big change? It seemed to be a revolution of white males, I mean, depending on whose interpretation you read, to try and move things a different way.
Well, there is certainly a new focus on tolerance and right-wing mindsets that would say we don't need affirmative action, we don't need preferences given for groups that have previously been denied, and we have to look anew at how diverse our various plums in America need to be. Let's go back to the way things have always been to benefit the good old boys. And so when you talk about a contract with America, a contract has two parties, and the party to the first part has to be a party to the second. So my concern is not as much a contract as the covenant that America has with its people for equality and justice and fair play.
So how do you see that changing, and how do you see that affecting the workplace?
I see voices that must be heard, that must insist upon inclusion. I see the call for an understanding that each person is to be valued and appreciated. And I see the need to challenge, when necessary, narrow thinking and persons who refuse to be change agents for betterment.
Well, your advice at the beginning of this interview was to travel, to be broader, to look for differences and that kind of thing. Sounds like that advice would be good for the people who are governing our states and our country.
I think so. I think it's essential from the Speaker of the House to all facets of the government. Change is vibrant, it's dynamic, it's an opportunity to experience difference. And I think that we can do that if we're willing, but you can't remain closeted into the comfort zone that says my way or no other way and expect to profit, benefit, or gain reward of human potential.
We have about a minute left. Is there another message or any summary message that you'd like to leave the people who are watching our show here today?
I'd like for people to know that first people want to know that you care before they care what you know. And so how shall you get to know people? You meet them at their point of need without judgment. And you will really find that there are more similarities than differences.
I think it's true that you don't understand even who you are until you meet another person and see the differences. And you don't understand your culture till you see another one, really. Is that been your experience as well?
I think so. And there's such oneness and synergistic communication when you figure out, you know, I think just like that.
Or I think differently, and it's okay. I've
And
learned
it's all
something
right.
from you.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we want to do here at Florida Community College. I'd like to thank you for being with us, Patricia.
It's my pleasure.
And I wish you best of luck in getting your message across.
Thank you.
This has been Carol Spalding Minor with Florida Community College at Jacksonville, thanking you for being with us on Worth Quoting.